For the best experience, put on your headphones and listen closely. Some things are only heard in the silence of the night. If at any point in this story you feel your breath catch or your heart race, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you're ready for more tales that haunt the night, subscribe to Dr. Scary Tales for new videos every week. It was late, far too late to be out shopping, but Walmart was open 24 hours, and I thought nothing of a quick midnight run for a few essentials. The clock had just ticked past 1 o'clock when I pulled into the empty parking lot. The store was a stark island of fluorescent lights surrounded by darkness, and for a moment I hesitated. The rows of cars were sparse, scattered as if forgotten by their owners, while the far reaches of the parking lot faded into pitch-black voids where the lights didn't quite reach. I stepped out of my car, the cold night air biting at my skin, a reminder that I should have brought a jacket. The sound of my footsteps echoed across the asphalt, a hollow tapping that seemed to bounce off the surrounding nothingness. The automatic doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, welcoming me into the too-bright interior. Inside, it was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every noise, from the hum of the overhead lights to the distant beeping of a register. I grabbed a cart, the rattle of the wheels unsettling in the emptiness, and pushed forward, taking in the endless aisles of goods stretching out before me like some kind of deserted maze. The store had a strange smell, something stale beneath the usual scents of plastic and cleaning products, like something had been left to rot in one of the back aisles. I shook off the feeling, attributing it to the late hour. No one shops at this time, I told myself. That's why it feels so off. But deep down, I knew there was more to it than just that. I wasn't at Walmart for fun. I had been restless lately. Too much happening at work, too many things going wrong in my life. I needed some space, some time to myself, and if wandering the fluorescent lit aisles of a 24-hour Walmart helped, so be it. I liked the isolation at first. It was calming, the silence, a stark contrast to the noise of my daily life, the phone calls, the emails, the constant noise of people needing something from me. Here, I was just another shopper, a nobody in the middle of the night, invisible to the world outside. But as I pushed my cart deeper into the store, a strange feeling settled over me. At first, it was just a flicker of unease, like the sensation of being watched, even though I was alone. I brushed it off. No one was watching me. The store was practically deserted. I hadn't seen a single employee, no fellow shoppers wandering the aisles, just me and the rows of neatly stocked shelves. Still, the feeling persisted, a knot forming in my stomach. As I moved through the aisles, strange things began to happen. The first sign was subtle, just a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow. There one moment, gone the next. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just a trick of the light or my mind playing games with me. But then it happened again. This time the shadow was clearer, darting between the aisles just ahead of me. I stopped, heart pounding in my chest. My eyes scanned the area, searching for any sign of someone or something, but there was nothing. Just rows of cereal boxes and canned goods lined up neatly on the shelves. I forced myself to keep going, but the sense of unease only grew. Every now and then, I'd hear the faintest sound, like a whisper, too quiet to make out the words. I strained to listen, but the more I focused on it, the more it seemed to fade away, as if whatever was making the noise didn't want to be heard. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a prank? Maybe one of the night workers messing around? But there were no giggles, no shuffling feet, just that constant, unnerving silence. The third encounter was impossible to ignore. I was in the electronics section, browsing through the aisles of phone chargers and headphones, when a loud crash echoed through the store. It was deafening. It came from the next aisle over, like someone had knocked over a display. My pulse quickened. My heart jumped into my throat as I froze, listening. The silence was suffocating, but there was no follow-up sound, no footsteps, no murmured apologies. Just the crash and then nothing, just the crash and then nothing. I hesitated before turning the corner. What would I see, another shopper? Or something else, maybe an employee cleaning up the mess? But when I peeked around the edge of the aisle, I found it empty. The shelves were pristine, nothing out of place. It was as if the crash had never happened. I stared at the spot where I swore I'd heard the sound. The unease was palpable. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as a cold draft seemed to pass over me, though the store was air-conditioned. Something was wrong. I turned back to my cart, intending to leave, but that's when I saw it. Something was in my cart, a small, ragged-looking doll. It was unsettling. It hadn't been there before. I would have noticed. My fear escalated. I backed away from the cart, my heart hammering in my chest. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. I didn't remember picking up a doll. I didn't even know what aisle it came from. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The bright overhead fluorescence dimmed for a moment, plunging the store into half-darkness. I could barely breathe as I looked around, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then the whisper came again. This time it was unmistakable, right by my ear. "Leave!" I spun around, but there was no one there. My breath came in ragged gasps as the lights flickered again, this time staying dim longer. In the distance at the far end of the store, I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, standing at the end of the aisle, watching me. Its face was obscured, shrouded in shadow, but I knew it was looking right at me. My legs felt like lead as I tried to move. I stumbled back, knocking over displays, my eyes never leaving the figure. It didn't move, didn't chase me. It just stood there, watching, waiting. Finally, the lights came back on fully and the figure was gone. I grabbed my cart, heart still racing, and bolted for the front of the store. I left the store that night without my groceries. Without anything, I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, desperate to escape. But even as I drove away, the feeling didn't leave me. That cold, creeping sensation of being watched. Every night since, I've heard it. That soft whisper just as I'm about to fall asleep, "Leave." I don't go to Walmart at night anymore, but no matter where I go, I can still feel it. Watching, waiting. If that story left you with a chill, go ahead and hit the like button. And if you're feeling brave enough for more, subscribe to Dr. Scary Tales for new stories every week. Trust me, the next one you won't want to listen to alone. But as unsettling as that story was, there's another one I can't shake. Something that happened just a few miles away from where I am right now. This next story didn't take place inside a store, but rather in the parking lot of an abandoned Walmart just off the highway. It had been closed down for nearly a decade, but for some reason people still claimed to see lights on late at night. Some said it was squatters or pranksters. Others believed it was something more sinister. The parking lot was massive, sprawling in all directions under a dark sky with flickering streetlights that barely illuminated the cracked pavement. The yellow lines had long since faded, and weeds pushed through the asphalt in jagged lines like veins. There was something about the sheer emptiness that unnerved me, but I convinced myself to park there anyway. The Walmart sign was still up, looming over the building like a tombstone. The windows, once bright with displays, were now boarded up with old plywood, but you could still see the outlines of what used to be faded posters, broken glass, the remnants of a forgotten place. It was the kind of place people avoided, especially after sunset, but I had nowhere else to go. The night was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made you feel like the world was holding its breath. As I sat in my car, staring out into the void, I couldn't help but feel watched. I hadn't meant to end up here. I was supposed to be heading out of town, just passing through on my way to a friend's house. But something drew me off the highway. I wasn't even sure why I pulled into the parking lot. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was because I'd heard the rumors and wanted to see if there was any truth to them. Or maybe deep down I was looking for something I couldn't quite explain. I was alone in the car, or at least I thought I was. The plan was to sleep for a few hours before getting back on the road. But as I leaned back in my seat, I started to notice things, little things. The way the streetlights flickered in a rhythmic pattern, almost like they were trying to communicate something. The distant sound of wind, except it wasn't windy. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was tired from the drive and that this place was just naturally creepy. But the longer I sat there, the more uneasy I became. It felt like the entire parking lot was watching me. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's the only way I can describe it. Like there were 100 unseen eyes fixed on me, waiting for something to happen. At first it was just subtle. A noise here, a shadow there. I'd catch something moving out of the corner of my eye, only to look and find nothing. The air was still, unnaturally so, and every breath I took felt heavy, like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. I kept glancing at the boarded-up entrance of the store, half expecting to see something, or someone, peeking out from behind the plywood. But it wasn't the store that bothered me the most, it was the parking lot. Something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but the longer I sat there, the more I realized. The cars. They weren't empty. I hadn't noticed when I pulled in, but there were about a dozen other cars parked in random spots across the lot. Old, rusty vehicles that looked like they hadn't been driven in years. At first I thought they were just abandoned, left behind when the store closed down, but then I saw it. A flicker of movement inside one of the cars. Just a small shadow shifting in the back seat. I told myself I was imagining things, but when I looked again, there it was. The shadow moved. My heart started pounding as I sat up straighter in my seat, my eyes locked on that car. I couldn't see clearly, too much distance between us, but I knew something was inside. The streetlight above it flickered again, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. And then the door opened, slowly, like someone or something was being careful not to make a sound. I squinted, trying to make out the figure stepping out of the car, but it was too dark. All I could see was a shape, tall and thin, moving unnaturally slowly. It didn't walk toward the store or toward the highway. It walked toward me. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as my breath quickened. I wanted to turn the car on, to drive away and never look back, but I couldn't. I was frozen, watching as the figure came closer. It stopped about 20 feet away, just standing there, its face obscured by the shadows. But I knew it was looking at me. I could feel it. Then, without warning, it turned and walked away, back toward the other cars. I watched as it moved between them, disappearing behind one of the rusted vehicles. My pulse was racing, but I told myself it was over. Maybe it was just some vagrant or a prankster messing with me, but deep down, I knew better. The seconds ticked by, and I was about to start the car when I noticed something else. The other cars, they were moving. Not in a normal way, like someone starting them up and driving off. No, it was subtle. A door creaking open here, a trunk popping up there. And then I saw them. Shadows, dozens of them, moving between the cars, their outlines barely visible in the dim light. They didn't rush toward me, didn't run, they just walked slowly, deliberately, and with each step they got closer. Panic gripped me as I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them between the seats. I reached down, desperately trying to grab them, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate. When I looked up, they were surrounding my car. Silent figures standing just outside the windows, their faces hidden. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized they weren't human. Their movements were wrong, their proportions too distorted, too twisted. One of them reached out and placed a hand on the window, leaving a smear of something dark and wet. I scrambled to find the keys, my heart racing as the figures pressed closer, their faces, or what I thought were faces, now inches from the glass. I don't know how, but I finally got the car started. The engine roared to life, and I hit the gas without thinking, swerving around the figures as they stepped back, almost as if they were letting me go. But as I sped out of the lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. They were all standing there in the middle of the parking lot watching me. And that's when I saw it. The lights of the store, they were on. But as strange as that experience was, there's another story I've heard, one that's even more chilling. It takes place far from any Walmart, but trust me, it'll make you think twice about driving alone at night. And as if that wasn't enough, there's another story that's even more disturbing. Something that happened a little closer to the heart of town, just on the outskirts, where the old Walmart warehouse still stands. This next one happened at a Walmart distribution center just off the main highway, a place most people forgot about after it was shut down. Unlike the brightly lit, bustling stores we're used to, this place was cold, silent, and utterly abandoned. The warehouse loomed over the desolate area like a massive metal beast, rust streaking down its walls from years of neglect. It had once been the center of distribution for dozens of stores in the region, but after a series of accidents, some say deaths, the corporation closed it down overnight. The surrounding area was littered with the remains of old shipping crates, broken pallets, and cracked concrete. No one had been in or out for years, at least, that's what they said. The building itself was huge, easily the size of several football fields, with loading bays lining the back. All the windows were shattered, leaving jagged, empty frames that stared out over the dead landscape. The chain-link fence that once surrounded the property had rusted away, sagging and torn in places, offering little protection from whatever might be lurking inside. It was quiet, too quiet. Even the usual hum of highway traffic was muffled here, as though the place had been cut off from the rest of the world. And when I first approached, I could feel the air change, growing heavier with each step. A storm was brewing in the distance, dark clouds rolling in, and with them a cold wind that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, but I kept walking. Something was pulling me toward the warehouse, something I couldn't explain. I wasn't alone this time. My friend Mark had insisted on tagging along. He'd heard the rumors, too, about the place being haunted, about strange lights seen flickering through the broken windows at night. He wasn't the superstitious type, but I could tell he was curious. Maybe a little too curious. Mark had always been the adventurous one, the kind of guy who didn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. To him, this was just another urban legend, a fun story to tell over a campfire. But for me, it was different. There was something about the warehouse that made my skin crawl, something that felt wrong the moment we pulled into the overgrown lot. "I don't know, man," I muttered, staring up at the dark structure. "This place gives me the creeps." Mark chuckled, brushing off my concerns with a wave. "It's just an old building, nothing to be scared of." But there was a nervous edge to his voice that didn't match his usual bravado. We stood there for a moment, the wind howling around us, before Mark nodded toward the loading bays. "Come on, let's check it out." The entrance to the warehouse was a gaping black hole, the massive metal doors half rusted shut. We squeezed through the narrow opening, our flashlights cutting thin beams through the thick darkness. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and the scent of something old, something long forgotten. At first it was just an empty shell. Rows of rusted shelving stretched out in every direction, covered in cobwebs and grime. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint creaking of the building settling. We wandered through the aisles, our footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. But then something changed. It started with a sound, faint, barely audible over the wind outside. A low whisper, like the wind had slipped inside the warehouse and was playing tricks on our minds. I stopped in my tracks, holding my breath, listening. There it was again. A soft voice, too quiet to make out the words, but close, too close. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark frowned, shaking his head. "Hear what?" I turned toward the far corner of the warehouse, where the sound seemed to be coming from. My flashlight flickered for a moment, the beam sputtering like it was struggling to stay alive. "I swear I heard something." Mark sighed. "It's probably just the wind." But even he seemed uneasy now, his flashlight darting from side to side as we moved deeper into the building. As we approached the back of the warehouse, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath hung in the air in front of me, visible in the dim light. Something wasn't right. The cold felt unnatural, almost suffocating, and then I saw it, an old office door slightly ajar, a dim light flickering inside. We exchanged glances, both of us hesitant to go any further, but curiosity, or maybe fear, drove us forward. The door creaked as we pushed it open, revealing a small, cluttered office. Papers were scattered across the floor, chairs overturned as if someone had left in a hurry. But it was the clock on the wall that caught my attention. Its hands were frozen at exactly 3:07, unmoving despite the second hand ticking away. I frowned, stepping closer, but Mark grabbed my arm. "Look at this," he muttered, pointing to the far wall. It was covered in old photographs, dozens of them pinned to the cracked plaster. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight over the images. They were all of people, employees, I guessed, standing in front of the warehouse, smiling for the camera. But there was something wrong with the photos. In every single one, there was a shadowy figure standing just behind the group. At first, it was barely noticeable, a faint outline, almost blending in with the background. But in the later photos, the figure grew clearer, its face still obscured, but its form more defined. And in the last photo, it was standing directly behind one of the men, a hand resting on his shoulder. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized something. The man in the last photo, he looked exactly like Mark. Before I could say anything, the lights in the office flickered and went out. Mark swore under his breath, fumbling for his flashlight, but when the beam came back on, the room had changed. The photographs were gone, replaced by something far worse. The walls were covered in writing scrawled in what looked like blood. Words and symbols I didn't recognize, but they all pointed to the same thing. We weren't alone. And then we heard it. The soft creak of a door opening behind us. I spun around, my heart racing, but the door was still shut, yet there was someone, something, standing in the shadows just outside the reach of the flashlight. It didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel its eyes on us. Watching, waiting. Mark grabbed my arm, his face pale. "We need to go now." We didn't wait. We bolted from the office, our footsteps echoing through the empty warehouse as we ran toward the exit. But as we reached the door, I made the mistake of looking back. The shadow was following us. No longer content to hide, it moved silently across the floor, its form twisting and stretching in unnatural ways. We barely made it to the car, slamming the doors shut just as the shadow reached the edge of the lot. It didn't follow us, not physically, but as we sped away, I could still feel it, watching us, waiting for the next time we'd come back. If you've ever had a chilling experience like this, Share it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Dr. Scary Tales for more stories that will keep you up at night.